Welcome to the Iowa Economy Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Conetzkey, president of BPC and publisher of the Business Record. The Iowa Economy Podcast is your place to get the economic insights you need to help your business stay ahead of Iowa's economic curve. We've got a special edition of the program today, which is going to give you a little peek behind the curtain here at our Economic Forecast Luncheon, which is set to take place on January 20th. I'm super excited for the event. We're going to learn a little bit from each of the panelists in advance of the event. Hope you can be there for that. We'll, of course, put ticket information in the links and in the chat, of course, as well. The question we're asking each of the panelists in advance of the event: what's the most important thing businesses should know about Iowa's economy in 2026? And one of our panelists at the event is Robin Anderson, who's the state's chief economist and division administrator for the Research and Policy Division at the Iowa Department of Revenue. Robin, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. So our question, of course, is what's the most important thing businesses should know about the Iowa economy in 2026? Go ahead and give us a little bit of a peek ahead of what you're thinking about.
Sure. So uncertainty has been a key theme of the post-pandemic Iowa and U.S. economies, whether it be uncertainty surrounding interest rates and inflation, commodity prices, asset prices, labor markets, or more recently, trade policy. In addition, the post-pandemic economy looks very different than the pre-pandemic economy, adding complexity to decision-making processes for businesses. The post-pandemic economy has been surrounded by high interest rates, high inflation, and strong consumer demand. In contrast, the post-financial crisis economy had an environment of low inflation, low interest rates, and sluggish consumer demand. So digging into some of these uncertainties, interest rates matter for agriculture, financial services, among other considerations. Trade policy matters for suppliers, manufacturers, retailers, and more. Uncertainty around farm policy and commodity prices matters for the agriculture sector, along with all the sectors connected with agriculture within the state. And uncertainty around labor market trends matters for a broad range of businesses. So what does all this mean for the Iowa economy in 2026? Well, uncertainty isn't going away. And this matters because economists know that uncertainty drives decision-making processes for businesses. Businesses may delay investment decisions or labor market decisions if they don't know where economic trends or policy trends are headed. In contrast, like we saw last year, they may pull forward those decisions to get ahead of unpredictability. Uncertainty is going to be here for 2026, and businesses must consider a broad range of scenarios in their decision-making processes.
When you talk about that delaying or advancing decisions, I think that has to play a little bit into making it a little tough to predict what revenues might look like for the state going forward. Were people making decisions that are buying goods and services ahead of time? Were they delaying those? And now there's going to be a ramp up here this year. I imagine that makes it a bit of a challenge for you as you're trying to do some forecasting.
Exactly. So what is interesting a little bit, what we saw this fiscal year is in fact pretty strong sales tax revenue, which suggests to me that perhaps people are pulling forward a little bit of those buying decision-making processes to get ahead of tariffs. In addition, we're seeing some challenges with corporate income tax revenues, in part because of what happened with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So we've got several policy decisions actually at the federal level, likely, unsure, but potentially driving some of the revenue that we see coming into the state.
The federal change on the corporate income tax, can you just talk briefly about that and how that might be affecting Iowa?
Sure. So with the One Big Beautiful Bill, there were some changes in corporate tax policy, and that likely affected some of the estimated payments coming in for corporate income payers starting in July with tax year 26.
Gotcha. Thank you for helping us get a little bit of tax policy a sneak peek there. Robin is going to be on our economic forecast panel. One of the areas, of course, that we're interested in because she's looking at revenues for the state budget. She's not necessarily the expert to tell us how to balance the budget for the state, but she is the one that can help us understand a little bit about what types of things drive revenue for the state and what areas have the potential for growth in the future or need some work as well. So, Robin, we're excited to have you on the panel.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, and next we've got Amy Frederick. She's the president of benefits and protection at Principal Financial Group. Amy, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Amy, go ahead and give us a little bit of what you're thinking about for the economy here in the upcoming year.
Yeah, so when I look ahead at the economy, and again, predicting the economy is a rough gig, no matter what cycle.
We promise we won't go back and hold you to it. Or maybe we will. I don't know. That could be fun also.
no matter what business cycle we're in, predicting the economy is something that's tough to do. But so I think of it in terms of kind of the theme for 2026. Feels like to me what we're headed into is something that has some nice steady pieces to it, but there is some persistent strain. So I think it's going to be marked by some more persistent pressures. And the pressures that you've talked about on your show, the pressures we talked about that aren't unique necessarily to Iowa, but things like some of the costs that have stayed sort of persistently inflated or persistently high. Some of the economic uncertainty around some of the trade pieces that continues to sit as a underpinning. And then certainly we can't ignore some of the geopolitical uncertainty pieces. Those do sit as an underpinning as well. But what I look at though is I come back and say, I'm seeing a lot of steadiness in the numbers as well, though. I do see that there is some underlying growth there. There's pieces that feel good and steady in terms of the capabilities of the businesses themselves. And so I feel like kind of a steady but strained is a good way to think about it. And if I were planning for 2026, what I would think about in that planning are things like going back and making sure that your people, your employees are well taken care of, making sure that you understand your existing customers as keenly as you understand those new customers that you want to try to grow with. And then making sure if you've got a differentiator in that marketplace, that you know what that is and that you're leaning really heavily into that. Because I think there's enough persistent, steady conditions that are positive that if you lean into those things, you're probably going to be setting yourselves up for a pretty good looking 2026.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that steady, but with pressure in the equation. I like thinking about like that. You described that really perfectly. That's kind of what I have felt myself, and I'm curious as you think about that environment. After a year where there was a lot of uncertainty as things kind of settled into place, you could almost get kind of caught still feeling in that cycle. So I'm curious from a business planning standpoint how you might think about that.
Yeah. So I mean, I mean, in the end, we're all running businesses. We're humans that are responding to stimuli around us. That human response to a lot of unexpected things or a lot of chaos is that we have this sort of rising sense of crisis all the time. Um, that's what I'm trying to balance out is there's a lot of steady. You got to be aware of the things that could throw you off course. And again, there's any given year, there's always plenty of those going on. But there's a lot of steadiness underneath. So I would say if you can bring sort of that piece down to run the business that's a little bit closer to that recognizing persistent threats, but also recognizing those things that have been persistently positive, you're probably going to put your best business plan together.
Well, Amy, we appreciate your input here and giving us a little bit of a peek at some of the things we'll dive deeper into at the economic forecast. Next, I want to bring on the screen our CFO of the Year award winner, who we're going to be honoring at our economic forecast. Her name is Ann Collins, and she's the Executive Vice President and CFO at EMC Insurance. Ann, congratulations first.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. It's a great recognition.
Well, we're excited to have an opportunity to hear from you at the event. But we thought, well, while we have you here, why not get a CFO's take on how you and EMC might be viewing the economy? So give us a little bit of a soundbite of what you're thinking about at this moment.
So EMC obviously is a property and casualty insurer, and we insure hundreds of small to medium-sized businesses within the state of Iowa. So we are very, very aware of what they are feeling in the economy. And I think Amy summarized it really, really well with the steady but strained. And I feel like when we talk with our insureds, they're constantly thinking about, it seems like we're doing okay, but there's just that one thing that's out there in the future that might impact us. Social inflation, geopolitical actions, all of those things that seem a little bit out of control for those small to medium-sized businesses, that's what they're worried about. They're excited about what has happened in 25 and want to continue that steady path that Amy talked about for 2026, but always just having that kind of like that antenna out there to think, okay, what is going to be that trigger that might impact us? I will say that we feel our Iowa companies are kind of a little bit more insulated than some of we write in over 40 states, so we see a little bit more of an economic shift somewhat on the coast versus our Iowa companies, but they're still impacted.
Well, the principal has and I'm not going to say the name of the survey correctly, but we had it on one of the podcasts, their small business survey, and it looks at small and medium and large businesses. And there was this big gap between how large businesses were feeling and small businesses. And I think as you're talking about that, it's that uncertainty for small businesses that when something happens, they might not have the same levers to be able to quickly affect and make change on that. They're just kind of caught by whatever it is that's happening. And so it's interesting to hear from the insurance standpoint how you guys are viewing that as well.
Right. Yeah, they most definitely small to medium sized companies want to plan as good as they can. But like you said, they don't have that leverage. They don't have that maybe that, I'll say extra surplus that can help absorb those shifts.
Well, thank you again for jumping on here with us, and congratulations. We'll look forward to honoring you with the Deloitte CFO of the Year award on January 20th. My last guest today is Eric Lohmeyer. He's going to be on the panel as well. He's the president of NCP Capital. Eric, appreciate you joining us today, and give us a little bit of insight on how you're viewing the economy right now.
So I'm going to take it a step back, and I'll focus a little bit today on the Iowa economy, or maybe the greater Midwest economy. I think we're going to have some time on the panel to go a little macro, which I hope to have a little fun with. What I'm seeing regionally is, and I'll kind of go with some of the positives and then one of my outlooks for the economy. But I feel like ag, frankly, has been so bad for the last 3 years. That piece of Iowa's economy is really the driver of what I'll call the real economy, outside of the financial services and some of the insurance pieces that you'll find more on the urban side. But, 60+% of our economy is quote unquote defined rural. And with all the trade wars, the tariffs, the cost pressures on the ag side, and then lower commodity prices, it's really been like great recessionary, what I would say, from an ag economy. And that really affects the manufacturing base. It affects the transportation and logistics base of Iowa, which are just huge. I think manufacturing is about 70% of our GDP. It's really hurt on the export side. So we've got these I don't say they're trade deals. I'll say they're trade transactions. So, soybeans is something, kind of on the front and center as far as that sale to China. A lot of that's moved to South America. So what I see is the ag economy seems to be bouncing around the bottom. I don't think it's regressing. I think that's a net positive, because I think it would be very hard for large producers to make kind of long-term CapEx, long-term expansion decisions in an environment where a different trade scenario or tariff scenario could happen literally overnight in a tweet. So what we're seeing is, I think it's going to be a net positive for kind of that base economy of Iowa and potentially the greater Midwest, where you've got replacement parts, you've got services, you've got when you're suffering financially, you're probably behind on your maintenance, so you've got a lot of deferred maintenance. So our projection is you're actually going to see a slight growth really on from an ag pull, if you will, and that commodity upside, near-term upside. We think the manufacturing will probably see marginal growth. We are seeing it and I mean the transportation and logistics sector, because of that bump from COVID and the come down, paired with a tough rural economy, has been like depressionary cycle. I do see that leveling out, and I think there's kind of a net positive for that part of the economy this year. So we're a little bit bullish, but on the flip side, and this is where it gets a little interesting, I do see a political environment, and I'll go to more of the regional economy, to Iowa specifically. We've got a midterm election cycle coming up. We've got a governor seat coming up. We've got a Senate seat coming up. So I think there's going to be some very interesting things that come out of that. And two things I'll mention. The central Iowa and Des Moines, we had a water crisis this year. And it's really something I remember Flint, Michigan, with the lead pipes. I mean, it was really close to that, where, I have 3 daughters. My 14-year-old daughter literally won't drink the water in out of the tap in Iowa anymore, and rightfully so, right? We also have a cancer crisis in Iowa. I think we're the number 2. That's not a real good number 2. where we have some of the highest cancer rates, not just in the United States, but actually in the world. And it's very highly correlated with that water quality. So what I think is you're going to see and I don't think either side of the political spectrum really wants to kind of dive into that issue or talk about that issue much. But what I do think is you're going to see a population that's very kind of concerned about that issue, more so than the next tax decrease or the next research and development credit or frankly deregulatory. And what I hope is the business community is a little less tone deaf to that, because I think what that leads to, and probably for some of the right reasons, is more of kind of a populist type of a nature. So I think you're actually going to have, as opposed to kind of the last 10 years, of the political situation in Iowa, I think it's much more up for grabs. And I think if I was on a business side of it, and I was kind of running that show, I think this might be a year to kind of hide back into the shadows and not necessarily overreach or grab for the additional tax cuts or deregulation, and kind of listen to where that what I do feel like is going to be some very large issues that aren't necessarily just quote business driven. That could bring a lot of noise as far as kind of the business climate in Iowa. So I'm kind of curious to what that starts to look like, especially as we enter into the summer months and kind of pre-election. I think that's going to be an interesting wild card.
It's a really good point. November feels far away when it's only January at the moment, but you're right. There's a lot that could be at play there. There will be transition regardless, and regardless of it's a political, a party transition, there'll be transition in the top seat of the state. So that does create a different thing to be thinking about. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm sure those will be some of the topics that we'll be able to talk about a little bit more at the event. Eric, thanks for being here. Thanks to all our panelists for joining us. And I hope if you're watching today before the economic forecast, we hope you join us on January 20th. That's out at the FFA Enrichment Center. We're going to have a nice packed house for that, where we're going to go deeper into some of these topics and more. You can find tickets for that at businessrecord.com/events. I'm sure we'll put it on the screen as well, so you can find that. We hope to see you there, and we hope you're enjoying this, and continue to watch the Iowa Economy podcast on a monthly basis as well. We're coming out on the second Monday of each month, and we hope to see you again then. Thank you.